there are a handful of Romans who we now perceive to have changed the world. I think it's very hard to go back and to say whether that's true or not. But there are Romans whose image and whose achievements, for good or bad, are so written up and so much part of the way history seems to have developed that we think of them as people without whom the world would not now be like it is. Now, I think that some of them are much murkier than we'd like to think, and we know much less about them than we imagine, but they occupy a place in how Western history thinks of itself having developed. I'm Mary Beard, and I've worked on the ancient Romans for 50 years, and I've written quite a lot of books about them. I've just started a new podcast called Instant Classics, which is about Greece and Rome.
The Romans who shaped the world.
I think what we ought to do is explore some of these really consequential Romans and ask a bit about why they have been so impactful on European history. And the one I would start with is the Emperor Augustus, the first Roman emperor. There is a bit of debate about whether Julius Caesar or Augustus should count as the first Roman emperor, but the first person to call himself emperor was the adopted great-nephew of Julius Caesar, born Octavian, who eventually changes his name when he takes sole power to become Augustus. His career is very long. After the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, when Octavian is still very young, he intervenes, raising an army himself to fight on the side of those who want to avenge the assassination of Caesar. There's a long civil war that follows that. What turns out is that Octavian is the last man standing. He finally beats Mark Antony, another of Caesar's great defenders, and in 31 BC is, as it were, left, after more than a decade of civil war, left as the person who is de facto ruling the Roman world. What is then extraordinary is how he moves from being actually a particularly unpleasant young thug in those civil wars, really violent, vicious combatant in civil war. He transforms himself, and at the same time transforms the Roman world. He transforms himself into the elder statesman emperor, gives up the name Octavian. He takes the name Augustus instead. Doesn't mean anything, really. If it means anything, I suppose it's revered one. And he establishes a system of one-man rule which lasts for centuries. He actually manages to craft a way that Rome could operate with one man at the helm, as against the Republican tradition of power sharing and quasi sort of democracy. And I think that what is absolutely extraordinary is that, A, we don't know how quite he did this. We have very few contemporary observing sources to tell us what happened during his reign. It lasts until 14 CE, longest reigning Roman emperor. But during that period, whatever the opposition was, he manages to construct a kind of set of political relationships, which still includes the old elite, it still includes the Senate, but now focused around the emperor as an individual. And that doesn't change. There is, for the rest of Roman history, that is how Rome is governed. And it provides a template for any number of monarchs and dictators ever after. It's a mystery. I mean, I think why it is so intriguing and enticing is we can't quite see how he did it. We don't know if at the end of the civil wars he had a master plan, or, as I suspect, he's improvising on the go to try to work out a system of power that people will, even if they don't like, go along with. And it worked. I'm not a great admirer of Roman imperial power, but you do have to hand it to Augustus that he established a centuries-lasting system of one-man rule. Extraordinary. I think as my number 2, I'm going to have a fellow traveller of Augustus, and I'm going to have the Roman poet Virgil, for the simple reason that Virgil, in writing his great epic of the foundation of Rome, Aeneas fleeing as a Trojan from the burning city of Troy to found the beginnings of the Roman race in Italy, he provided for all time a way of understanding what empire was and its paradoxes. It's not a jingoistic poem. It's a rather careful and thoughtful poem. It's a poem, I think, than which no other poem has ever been so successful. It's a fair bet, I couldn't prove it, but it's a fair bet that since Virgil died in 19 BCE, every day somebody somewhere has been reading this poem, the Aeneid, and it captures both the ambition of the Roman Empire to be an empire without end, but it also captures the doubts, the problems, and the costs of what come with empire. In the final scene of the poem, you see the hero, Aeneas, kill somebody who has surrendered to him in a war crime that was a war crime even in ancient Rome. Use the final scene, says, look at the costs of empire. It has been utterly influential ever after, and probably almost as influential, very close second to Augustus himself. I think my 3rd spot is going to go to Julius Caesar. I say that slightly reluctantly, because Julius Caesar was very much a flash in the pan. He has a fairly ordinary career when he starts out. He becomes clearly more and more concerned to become a single populist leader at Rome, to dispense with the trappings of democracy, and to establish himself as a one-man ruler. He sort of does that. That's true. He does it by techniques that are still in the playbook of populist politicians. He speaks directly to the people. He bypasses the institutions of the state. He uses the ancient equivalent of social media to communicate with the Roman people. And he does transcend the conventions and the norms of Roman sort of democracy. The problem is, and why he only comes in 3rd place, is it's a flash in the pan. He's only there for 5 years, and most of the time he's off out of Rome somewhere else. He doesn't establish anything. He shakes everything up, but he doesn't put structures in place. I think for number 4, we're going to go to Cincinnatus, who is, I have to confess, not entirely, but very largely a mythical character. But his myth is so strong that I think he counts for me as one of these really influential people. What we can tell about him is that he was a very conservative politician in Rome in the 5th century BCE, towards the beginning of the Republic. He is very much an opponent of the rights of the Roman people, very much, a conservative patrician. He has some pretty rocky encounters with reforming plebeian politicians. But what is key about Cincinnatus is that he's consul for a short time. After he's been consul, chief officer of the Roman state, he goes to his farm and he, as it were, says, I've done my bit. I'm now going to do the farm. I'm going to become an ordinary person again. A few years later, when Rome is really suffering in a tense military standoff, Roman people come to him, the Roman authorities come to him, and they say, could you please come and save Rome? We need your expertise. What he does is he goes back, he takes charge, he saves Rome against the enemy, but then he goes straight back to his farm. And I think that what is so important about Cincinnatus, and his name is still reflected in Cincinnati after all, what is important is that he did not break through the conventions of the Republic. He showed that you could serve the state without taking it over. And so he became a huge hero and a role model for those who wanted to lead without being an autocrat. So I think he nudges himself in there for me. For number 5, I'm going to have the brothers Gracchi, Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus, at the second half of the 2nd century BCE. Amazingly charismatic characters, which are sometimes put down, their charisma is sometimes put down to the influence of their mother, Cornelia, who groomed them to be politicians. Why I've chosen them is, well, for 2 reasons. They represent the first time we see clearly a leading Roman politician explicitly and in a thought-out way taking the side of the non-elite versus the elite. Now, they come from an elite background, but both of them stand up in different ways for the rights of the poor and the dispossessed. Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BC sees the terrible economic distress of the peasant class in Rome and initiates a land redistribution program. Gaius Gracchus, his brother, a decade later, reinitiates that because it gets stalled. But Gaius Gracchus is the first person in Roman history that we can see has not just some good ideas, but he has some good ideas that fit together into a program. He has land distribution, he has the distribution of subsidized grain to the Roman people, he has anti-corruption laws, he has changes in taxation. He seems to me to be the first person who kind of has joined up politics in Rome. Now, I'm afraid both of them come to sad ends. Tiberius and Gaius are both basically subject to judicial murder by conservative senators, and they're killed on the job in a way. But they become forever after this beacon of people who could reformulate how politics should be. And in Tiberius's case, I think in some ways he's not as radical as Gaius, but he explicitly says the profits of the Roman Empire should go to the Roman people, not just to the elite. That's a crucial step forward. Number 6 is the Roman politician Marcus Tullius Cicero. And I've chosen him because he is the absolute summing up of what it is to see oratory, persuasion, and speaking as the foundation of democracy. Cicero is not a military man. He has a bit of military experience, but he's pretty lousy at it. He is a new man in Roman politics. He doesn't have a whole set of elite ancestors. He's not poor, but he's not part of the established political class, and he speaks his way to the top. He sees that persuading your fellow citizens is where power consists in. He gets office very early in Rome. He unmasks what looks like a terrorist conspiracy against the Roman state from within, the conspiracy of Catiline. He actually rather brutally puts it down, but his words have never, ever been forgotten. Like so many Romans have a sad end. He is in the civil war between the heirs of Julius Caesar and the assassins of Julius Caesar. In that civil war, he's assassinated, basically. But he made it clear, and continues to make it clear, that you can persuade people to act differently. You can still see Latin quotes from Cicero on placards in today's political demonstrations. That's how important he is. I've chosen as number 7 the Emperor Nero, not because I'm a particular fan of Nero. And in fact, it's now very hard to know how you cast judgment on Nero. The sources about Nero are so hostile. And yet we also know that he had popularity during his lifetime. And after his death, there were false Neros, people claiming to be Nero, bubbled up in the East saying, look, I didn't die, here I am, I'm Nero. That suggests a degree of popularity. But I think that in a way of reformulating what it was to be emperor, he showed that there were different ways of demonstrating your power. These have almost always got really rubbished by his opponents, and we're the inheritors of that rubbishing. We still talk, we still have cartoons, of modern political leaders doing what Nero is supposed to have done, fiddling and singing while Rome burns. It's still part of our own political rhetoric. But what is clear is that Nero put art and culture right at the heart of what it was to be a Roman emperor. And in some ways, the example of Nero was always bubbling under the surface of Roman political power ever since. He has become the butt of criticism, not just fiddling while Rome burned, but also his sense of apparent vanity. He was a great actor and he would perform in theatres and he would lock the theatre doors so that people couldn't get out while he was still performing, so that some women were supposed to have had babies in the theatre while they were waiting for the emperor to finish. But I think there is a sense there that saying power doesn't just rest in the sword, doesn't just rest in speech making. Power is also represented in art, in culture, in theatre, in the softer arts. I mean, Nero's about soft power, if you like, if we see him in a generous way. My last choice is the historian Cornelius Tacitus, active in the late 1st and early 2nd century CE. Now, actually, Tacitus, in real life, have to say, was a bit of a collaborator with Roman imperial power. He flourished, as he himself admits, under a particularly obnoxious emperor, Domitian. But that's not why I'm choosing him. I'm choosing him because his account of the dynasty of the Julio-Claudians, the emperors that followed Augustus in the 1st century CE, his account of that dynasty is, in my view, the most searing account of one-man rule ever. He homes in on exposing how corruption works and on exposing the way that people collude with imperial power, the way the empire, in the sense not of the geographical empire, but the empire in the sense of one-man rule, pollutes the Roman state. When people read his Latin, they find him very hard to read. Actually, the language is extremely difficult. People can often find that very frustrating and irritating. But that language has a point. What Tacitus is saying is that I cannot describe how one-man rule works, except in language that is itself corrupted. One-man rule corrupts what you say. Now, in some ways, I think Tacitus's modern heir is George Orwell, who sees that the corruption of language and the corruption of speech goes along with corruption in power. You might notice, and I certainly noticed when I was compiling the list, that there were no women on it. Look, I'm a feminist, and I had a bit of heart searching, but I thought I could have found a woman. I could have found, for example, the Emperor Augustus's wife, Livia. And I could have put her in there. In some ways, it would have made me feel better not to have an all-bloke lineup. I don't think that would have been the right thing to do. I think that there were women of immense talent in Rome. Of course there were. There were women who had influence and who exercised power in all kinds of ways. Of course there were. I think the problem is that they are lost to us. We can reinvent them, but it is literally reinvention. I think that to some extent, you have to face up to the maleness of the official Roman world. I hope that I have faced up to it, and also to see there must have been different perspectives here, but they are almost entirely lost to us. Instead, what we get when Roman writers think about powerful women, they do think of people like Augustus's wife, Livia, but their power is always for the bad. Now, what is the role of Livia in that early dynasty? Well, it's the role that she had in Robert Graves's I, Claudius. She's the poisoner, the schemer. She's the person that you can blame for why things went wrong. I mean, women's power is perceived in the ancient world as being corrosive. Whether that's Cleopatra, who is seducing and somehow emasculating upstanding young Romans like Mark Antony, or the women of the imperial court who are scheming behind the scenes to bring about either their own erotic desires. Who am I going to sleep with next? Women are notoriously sexual beings for Roman historians, but also trying to influence who actually gets on the throne. Now, the trouble is that might have been the case. We can't know, but we do know that women are always very convenient people to blame for when men mess things up. The history of Western misogyny is very adept at finding women to blame for when things go wrong. And I think it more or less started in the Roman Empire. I think the question of how you judge these people is very tricky. People often write into me and say, I don't like the way that you do sometimes make judgments about X as a mass murderer when they're 2,000 years in the past. Surely, it's often said, you should be judging them on their own terms, not on your terms. I've got two responses to that. One is quite often these people were hostilely judged in antiquity itself. But we rather brush that under the carpet. Julius Caesar, for example, it's reckoned now that he may well have killed about 1 million Gauls in his campaign against Gaul. And there were people in Rome who said he was committing crimes against humanity. And this is not a new invention that Caesar was a war criminal. There were people in Rome who said that. So I think we have to be very careful always to listen out for the discordant voices in antiquity itself. But I think perhaps more important is that the job of the historian, and this kind of explains, I think, why we sometimes find there's a flip-flop here between one sort of judgment of Alexander the Great and another, favourable or not favourable, same with Caesar, whatever, is that the job of the historian, I think, is to have stereoscopic vision. I think it is important to understand these characters in their own context and in their own terms, and how people, by the standards of their time. Yes, I think you should do that. But I think that the modern historian can't just leave their own moral values, at the library door. I do, at a certain point, have to say, I find the conquests of Alexander the Great very, very uncomfortable. And I think what I particularly dislike in terms of our modern appropriation of them is the way we somehow seem to go along with approving of what they did. I might not want to disapprove of it. I might want to say in part that by the standards of their own time was okay. But I do have to say it's not the standards of ours. And we have to realise that there are moral issues and questions about what happened in antiquity that we shouldn't be afraid of bringing to the surface. I'm very happy to do that. I mean, I think it's quite interesting. I've chosen a group of men for my most influential Romans. I think I had no choice but to do that. I can also say, but I think there is something about the misogyny of the Roman Empire that I deplore. And you have to be able to hold those two views at the same time, I think.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.